June 7, 1944. The fields of Normandy are still burning from the previous day's landings. Smoke drifts low across hedgerows, carrying the acrid stench of cordite and charred steel. German officers, confident in their armored superiority, scan the horizon from concealed positions. To them, the Allied tanks rolling inland are little more than paper machines, thin-skinned, undergunned, destined to be slaughtered by the prowling Panthers and Tigers. But then, the ground begins to tremble. Columns of M4 Shermans push forward, their engines growling in unison. Dust and mud spray from their tracks as they surge through the bocage. Some burst into flames under German fire, yet more keep coming. For every Sherman knocked out, another two appear, advancing relentlessly. Inside the cramped steel hulls, young crews grip their controls, sweat dripping down their faces. They know the odds. They know the enemy's guns can pierce them with ease. Still, they press forward, driven by numbers, by momentum, by the sheer weight of Allied industry behind them. The German scoff of paper tanks is about to be tested in fire. By the late summer of 1942, the Second World War had become a contest of machines as much as men. Across the deserts of North Africa, the rolling plains of the Eastern Front, and the skies above occupied Europe, technology dictated survival. And nowhere was this more evident than in the clash of armored forces. Germany had entered the war with a doctrine built on speed and shock. The Blitzkrieg campaigns of 1939 and 1940 had stunned the world. Panzer divisions, spearheaded by Panzer IIIs and IVs, tore through Poland, France, and the Low Countries with ruthless efficiency. These tanks were not invincible, but they were well coordinated, supported by artillery, infantry, and the Luftwaffe. To Allied soldiers, the sight of German armor advancing in tight formation was enough to trigger panic. By 1941, as Hitler turned eastward toward the Soviet Union, German tank design leapt forward again. The appearance of the Tiger I in late 1942 with its thick armor and devastating 88mm gun sent shockwaves through Allied command. Soon after, the Panther emerged, combining sloped armor with a high-velocity 75mm cannon. These machines were not just weapons, they were symbols of German engineering supremacy. Against them, the Allies struggled. British Matildas and Crusaders, American Stuarts and Grants all had their moments, but none could match the balance of firepower, protection, and mobility that German tanks brought to the battlefield. In North Africa, British crews often found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered. American units arriving in 1942 with M3 Grants quickly discovered that their tall silhouettes and limited main guns made them easy prey for German anti-tank weapons. The imbalance was not just technical. It was psychological. German tank crews carried themselves with a confidence born of battlefield success. Allied soldiers, by contrast, often spoke of dread when facing a Tiger. Reports circulated of shells bouncing harmlessly off German armor, while return fire from the enemy tore through Allied tanks with ease. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were forming. German tanks were powerful, but they were also complex, expensive, and slow to produce. A Tiger might dominate a battlefield, but only if it arrived in time, fueled, and mechanically sound. The Wehrmacht could field them in dozens, not thousands. The Allies, meanwhile, had something Germany lacked: industrial scale. American factories, untouched by bombing, were gearing up for mass production on a level the world had never seen. Detroit, the arsenal of democracy, was retooling its automobile plants to churn out tanks, trucks, and aircraft in staggering numbers. What the Allies needed was not a perfect tank. They needed a tank that could be built quickly, shipped across oceans, maintained in the field, and deployed in overwhelming numbers. A tank that might not outgun a Tiger in a duel, but could swarm the battlefield, supported by artillery, infantry, and air power. That tank would be the M4 Sherman. But in 1942, as the first Shermans rolled off the assembly lines, few could have predicted the role they would play. To German eyes, the Sherman looked unimpressive: a boxy silhouette, a medium gun, armor that seemed thin compared to the monsters of the Reich. Nazi commanders dismissed it as a paper tank, a machine that would crumple under the weight of German firepower. They were not entirely wrong. Early Shermans did burn easily when hit, earning the grim nickname Ronson, after the cigarette lighter that lights every time. Crews knew the risks. They climbed inside anyway. The stage was set for a clash not just of machines, but of philosophies. German engineering perfection against Allied industrial pragmatism, and as the war shifted from the deserts of North Africa to the mountains of Italy, the Sherman would begin to prove its worth. The M4 Sherman was not born from a quest for battlefield perfection. It was born from necessity. In 1941, as America prepared for a war it knew was coming, military planners faced a stark reality. The United States needed a tank that could be built in the tens of thousands, shipped across oceans, and maintained by mechanics with only basic training. The design philosophy was pragmatic. The Sherman would not carry the heaviest gun, nor the thickest armor. Instead, it would be reliable, mobile, and adaptable. Its 75mm gun was adequate against most German tanks of 1942. Its armor, though thinner than a Tiger's, was sloped to deflect incoming rounds. Most importantly, its mechanical systems were simple. Crews could repair a Sherman in the field with spare parts and basic tools, something German crews with their complex machines often envied. Production began in 1942, and soon the scale became staggering. American factories, retooled from automobile assembly lines, produced Shermans at a rate the world had never seen. By the end of the war, nearly 50,000 had rolled off the lines. They were shipped not only to U.S. forces, but to Britain, Canada, Free French units, and even the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease. To German commanders, this flood of Shermans seemed laughable. Compared to the hulking Tiger or the sleek Panther, the Sherman looked unimpressive. Its armor could be pierced by most German anti-tank guns. Its guns struggled against the thick frontal plates of German heavy tanks. Nazi propaganda derided it as a paper tank, a machine that would crumple under fire. And in many early encounters, that appeared true. In North Africa, Shermans faced the Afrika Korps under Erwin Rommel. German 88mm guns tore through them with ease. Crews spoke of the terrifying moment when a single hit could ignite the fuel and ammunition, turning the tank into a fireball. The grim nickname Ronson, after the lighter that lights every time, spread quickly among Allied soldiers. Yet the Sherman had qualities that statistics could not capture. It was fast. It was maneuverable. It could climb slopes and cross terrain that heavier German tanks often struggled with. And above all, it was available in numbers. Where the Germans fielded a handful of Tigers, the Allies could deploy dozens of Shermans. In Italy, beginning in 1943, this advantage became clear. The mountainous terrain limited the effectiveness of heavy German armor. Shermans, supported by artillery and infantry, pushed steadily northward. Losses were heavy, but replacements arrived quickly. A destroyed Sherman could be replaced within weeks. A destroyed Tiger might take months to rebuild. The psychological effect was profound. German crews might win duels, but they could not stop the tide. For every Sherman destroyed, more appeared. Allied commanders began to understand that the Sherman was not meant to fight alone. It was part of a system, combined arms warfare, where tanks, infantry, artillery, and air power worked together. By the spring of 1944, as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France, the Sherman had become the backbone of their armored forces. Thousands were stockpiled in Britain, ready to cross the Channel. Crews trained relentlessly, learning to fight not as lone tankers but as coordinated units. The Germans still scoffed. They believed their Panthers and Tigers would crush the invasion. They believed the Sherman would burn, just as it had in North Africa. But the battlefield of Normandy would prove that war is not won by the best machine on paper. It is won by the machine that arrives in numbers, that keeps moving, that can be repaired and returned to the fight. And when the Shermans rolled ashore on June 6, 1944, the German perception of paper tanks would face its greatest test. Inside the Sherman, space was tight. 5 men shared a steel box barely large enough to stand upright. The driver and assistant driver crouched low in the hull, their vision limited to narrow slits. Above them, the gunner, loader, and commander worked in constant coordination, their lives dependent on seconds of timing. Heat built quickly. In summer campaigns, the interior could feel like an oven. The roar of the engine, the clatter of treads, and the deafening blast of the main gun created a world of noise and vibration. Crews often described the sensation of being inside a Sherman as both empowering and terrifying, a strange mix of invincibility and fragility. They knew the risks. A single hit from a German 88mm could turn their tank into a fireball. Yet camaraderie bound them together. Crews gave their tanks names, painted them on the hull, and treated the machine almost as a sixth crew member. Survival depended not only on armor and firepower, but on trust that each man would do his job under fire. The Sherman was never designed to fight German heavy tanks head-on. Allied doctrine emphasized combined arms, tanks working with infantry, artillery, and air support. Shermans advanced in groups, supported by mobile artillery barrages and fighter bombers overhead. In North Africa, this doctrine was still developing. By Normandy, it had matured. Shermans were used to exploit breakthroughs, to push through gaps created by artillery and airstrikes. They were not duelists, they were part of a system. This tactical philosophy frustrated some crews, who longed for a tank that could match the Tiger in a straight fight. But commanders like Eisenhower and Montgomery understood the larger picture. The Sherman's role was not to dominate in single combat. It was to keep moving, to overwhelm, to sustain momentum. When Shermans fought as intended in mass, with support, they were devastating. German units often found themselves outflanked, their heavy tanks bogged down or isolated. A Tiger might destroy several Shermans, but eventually it would be surrounded, cut off, and destroyed. On paper, the Sherman was outclassed. Its 75mm guns struggled against the frontal armor of Panthers and Tigers. Its armor, though sloped, could be penetrated by most German anti-tank weapons, and its tendency to ignite when hit gave it a grim reputation. But technology is more than numbers. The Sherman's reliability was legendary. German tanks often broke down after long marches. Shermans kept running. Spare parts were plentiful, and mechanics could swap out an engine in hours. Its wide tracks gave it surprising mobility across mud, snow, and sand. Adaptability was another strength. Variants appeared with flamethrowers, rocket launchers, amphibious gear, and most famously, the British Firefly conversion, which mounted a powerful 17-pounder gun capable of killing even a Tiger. The Sherman was not the best tank of the war, but it was the most versatile. It could be built in thousands, shipped across oceans, and modified for any role. In the end, that mattered more than raw firepower. For Allied commanders, the Sherman was more than a tank, it was a strategic instrument. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, valued reliability and numbers above all. He understood that the war in Europe would not be won by duels between individual tanks, but by sustained offensives across vast fronts. The Sherman, with its ability to be produced and maintained in staggering quantities, fit perfectly into his vision. General George S. Patton, the fiery American armored commander, was equally pragmatic. He knew the Sherman was not the strongest tank on the battlefield, but he also knew it was fast, maneuverable, and available in numbers. Patton's doctrine emphasized speed and aggression, qualities the Sherman could deliver. A good plan, violently executed now, is better than a perfect plan next week, he famously said. The Sherman embodied that philosophy, not perfect, but present and ready to fight. British commanders, too, recognized its value. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery pushed for the adaptation of the Sherman into the Firefly variant, mounting the British 17-pounder gun. This gave Allied forces a weapon capable of piercing even the Tiger's armor, ensuring that Shermans could hold their own in tank duels when necessary. From the German perspective, the Sherman was initially dismissed. Nazi commanders referred to it as a paper tank, believing it would fold under the firepower of their Panthers and Tigers. In one-on-one encounters, they were often correct. German gunners could destroy Shermans at long range, while Allied crews struggled to penetrate German armor. But as the war dragged on, German officers began to see the Sherman differently. Reports from the Eastern Front had already shown the danger of Soviet mass production with the T-34. Now, in the West, the Sherman represented a similar threat. For every Tiger that rolled out of a German factory, dozens of Shermans arrived in Europe. German tank crews grew frustrated. They might destroy several Shermans in a single engagement, only to be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The psychological toll was immense. A Tiger commander could never relax. He knew that even if he won today's duel, tomorrow would bring more Shermans, more artillery, more aircraft. By late 1944, German officers no longer scoffed. They feared the tide of Shermans that seemed endless, grinding down their armored divisions through attrition. For the men inside the Sherman, the war was a constant test of courage. They knew their tank was vulnerable. They knew that German shells could ignite their fuel and ammunition in an instant. Yet they climbed inside, day after day, and advanced into battle. The psychological burden was heavy. Crews often spoke of the dread that came with hearing the crack of an 88mm gun. They knew that survival often depended on luck, whether the enemy spotted them first, whether their tank was hit in a vulnerable spot, whether they could escape a burning hull in time. And yet, there was resilience. Crews adapted. They learned to fight in groups, to use terrain, to call in artillery and air support. They learned to trust the system, that they were not alone, that the Sherman was part of a larger machine of war. This resilience became a moral weapon in itself. German crews, isolated and outnumbered, often felt despair. Allied crews, despite their losses, felt momentum. They believed in the inevitability of victory, and the Sherman, flawed, vulnerable, but ever-present, became the symbol of that belief. The Sherman was not the strongest tank of the war, nor the most feared, but it was the most consequential. And as the summer of 1944 unfolded in Normandy, its true role would be revealed not in theory, but in the fire and chaos of battle. June 6, 1944. The beaches of Normandy erupt in fire and steel. Allied infantry claw their way inland under relentless machine gun fire, while tanks struggle to land through surf and obstacles. Among them are the Shermans, some fitted with flotation screens, others modified with bulldozer blades or rocket launchers. Many sink before reaching shore. Others are destroyed by mines or artillery, but enough survive. By nightfall, Shermans are pushing beyond the beaches, their tracks grinding over the shattered defenses of Hitler's Atlantic Wall. For the German defenders, this is the moment they had prepared for. Panzer divisions, including the feared 21st Panzer and later the 12th SS Hitlerjugend, moved to counterattack. Their Panthers and Tigers lie in wait, concealed behind hedgerows and villages. The bocage country of Normandy, narrow lanes, thick earth banks, and dense hedges, becomes a nightmare battlefield. Visibility is short, ambushes are constant, and every field can hide a gun. Here, the Sherman's weaknesses are laid bare. German tanks, firing from cover, knock them out at alarming rates. Crews speak of the terror of advancing into a hedgerow only to see a flash of fire and feel the tank shudder as armor is pierced. Burning Shermans litter the fields, their black smoke rising into the summer sky. But the Allies adapt. Engineers develop Rhino Shermans, fitted with steel tusks to smash through hedgerows instead of exposing themselves at narrow gaps. Infantry and tanks learn to coordinate more closely, clearing ambushes together. Artillery pounds suspected German positions before each advance. Slowly, painfully, the Shermans begin to push forward. The Germans, meanwhile, discover a new threat, the British Sherman Firefly. Conceived in 1943, the Firefly mounts the powerful 17-pounder gun, capable of killing even a Tiger at long range. In Normandy, Fireflies are mixed into Sherman units, often one per troop of 4 tanks. German crews quickly learn to fear them. Reports describe Tiger commanders ordering their men to target Fireflies first, recognizing the long barrel of the 17-pounder as a mortal danger. The duels are brutal. At Villers-Bocage, German ace Michael Wittmann and his Tiger destroy a column of Shermans in minutes, a reminder of German lethality. But elsewhere, Fireflies ambush Panthers and Tigers, proving that the Allies now have a weapon capable of piercing German armor. The balance is shifting. The Sherman, once mocked as a paper tank, is now part of a system that is grinding down the Wehrmacht. For every Sherman destroyed, replacements arrive. For every German tank knocked out, the loss is irreplaceable. By July, the Allies are preparing for a breakout. Operation Cobra will unleash massed air power and armored thrusts to shatter the German lines. The Sherman, battered but unbroken, is ready to lead the charge. By late July 1944, the Allied advance in Normandy had stalled. The Bocage country, with its thick hedgerows and narrow lanes, had turned every mile into a bloody struggle. German armor, though outnumbered, continued to exact a heavy toll. The Allies needed a breakthrough. That breakthrough came with Operation Cobra, launched on July 25. The plan was simple but devastating: unleash the full weight of Allied air power to smash a hole in the German lines, then send armored divisions, spearheaded by Shermans, pouring through. The skies darkened as thousands of American bombers roared overhead. Entire German positions were obliterated in a storm of high explosives. When the dust settled, the Shermans advanced. This time, they did not creep cautiously through hedgerows. They surged forward across open ground, exploiting the chaos. German defenses buckled. Panthers and Tigers, once so dominant, found themselves overwhelmed. Many were destroyed not by tank duels, but by artillery, fighter bombers, and the relentless tide of Shermans pressing forward. The German armored reserve, already thin, could not withstand the onslaught. For the first time, the Sherman's true strength was undeniable. It was not the individual duel that mattered, it was the system. Shermans advanced in mass, supported by infantry, artillery, and airstrikes. They bypassed strongpoints, encircled defenders, and kept moving. German commanders, accustomed to tactical superiority, now faced a nightmare, a war of attrition they could not win. The breakout was dramatic. Within days, American armored columns were racing across France. Patton's Third Army, fueled by Sherman's, advanced with breathtaking speed. Town after town fell. German units, cut off and surrounded, surrendered in droves. At the Falaise Pocket in August, the scale of German defeat became clear. Trapped between advancing Allied forces, entire divisions were destroyed. Sherman's played a central role, sealing escape routes and crushing resistance. The once feared German panzers were now burning wrecks along the roadside. The psychological shift was profound. German commanders who had once mocked the Sherman as a paper tank now faced the reality of its power. It was not invincible, but it was unstoppable. For every Sherman destroyed, more arrived. For every German tank lost, there was no replacement. By September, the Allies were racing toward the German border. The Sherman, flawed yet relentless, had become the spearhead of liberation. The breakout from Normandy was more than a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of industrial war at its peak. By August 1944, the Allies had landed over 2 million men in France, supported by nearly 12,000 tanks and armored vehicles, the majority of them Shermans. The cost was staggering. In Normandy alone, the Allies lost more than 4,000 tanks, most of them Shermans. Fields and villages were littered with burned-out hulls, grim reminders of the price paid for every mile gained. Crews who survived spoke of the constant churn, one day in a new tank, the next day climbing into another after their first had been destroyed. But the losses, though heavy, were sustainable. American factories were producing Shermans at a rate of nearly 2,000 per month. Replacement tanks arrived in France faster than German forces could destroy them. For every Sherman knocked out, another was waiting in a depot in Britain, ready to be shipped forward. The Germans faced the opposite reality. Their vaunted Tigers and Panthers were formidable, but production was slow and vulnerable to Allied bombing. A Tiger required over 300,000 man-hours to build, a Sherman, less than 50,000. By the summer of 1944, Germany could produce only a few hundred heavy tanks each month, while the Allies flooded Europe with thousands. The imbalance was not just in numbers. It was in logistics. Shermans could be repaired quickly, often returned to service within days. German tanks, when damaged, were frequently abandoned because spare parts were scarce and recovery vehicles were few. Even when intact, many broke down during long marches, left behind as their crews retreated. Reports from the front reflected this contrast. German commanders complained bitterly of being overwhelmed. One officer wrote that for every Panther destroyed, 10 more Shermans appeared. Allied reports, meanwhile, acknowledged the Sherman's vulnerabilities but praised its reliability and availability. Commanders emphasized that the Sherman was never meant to fight alone, it was part of a combined system that included artillery, infantry, and air power. The psychological effect was immense. German tank crews, once confident, now felt hunted. They knew that even if they destroyed several Shermans, the tide would not stop. Allied crews, though fearful of German guns, drew strength from momentum. They believed in the inevitability of victory, and the Sherman, flawed but ever-present, became the symbol of that inevitability. By the end of August, the German army in France was shattered. Tens of thousands of prisoners marched into captivity. Hundreds of tanks lay abandoned or destroyed. The Allies, advancing on a broad front, were already looking toward the German border. The Sherman had paid a heavy price, but it had done its job. It had carried the Allies through the hedgerows, across the plains of France, and into the heart of Europe. By the autumn of 1944, the Sherman had become the backbone of Allied armored power. From the liberation of Paris in August to the drive toward the German frontier, its tracks carved the path of advance. Towns across France and Belgium saw columns of Shermans rolling through their streets, cheered by civilians who understood that these machines represented liberation. But the fighting was far from over. As the Allies approached the German border, resistance stiffened. The Siegfried Line, a vast network of bunkers, dragon's teeth, and fortified positions, tested the Sherman once again. Here, the tank's adaptability proved vital. Engineers modified Shermans with bulldozer blades to clear obstacles, flamethrower variants to burn out bunkers, and bridge-laying versions to cross anti-tank ditches. The Sherman was no longer just a tank, it was a platform for every battlefield need. Then came the Ardennes, December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge was Germany's last great gamble. In the snow-covered forests, Panthers and Tigers launched surprise attacks, tearing through thin Allied lines. Shermans bore the brunt of the assault. Losses were heavy, but the tide turned once again through numbers, resilience, and coordination. When the skies cleared, Allied air power returned, and Shermans counterattacked en masse. The German offensive collapsed, leaving their armored forces crippled. By early 1945, the Sherman was pushing across the Rhine. In city after city, Cologne, Frankfurt, Nuremberg, Shermans fought street by street, often against desperate defenders. The war in Europe ended in May, and by then, the Sherman had become a symbol of Allied victory. In the years that followed, debates raged. Critics pointed to the Sherman's vulnerabilities, its thin armor, its tendency to ignite, its inferiority in one-on-one duels with German heavy tanks. Supporters countered with the facts. The Sherman was reliable, adaptable, and available in overwhelming numbers. It was not the best tank of the war, but it was the right tank for the war the Allies had to fight. Historians later emphasized that the Sherman was never meant to fight Tigers on equal terms. It was designed to be part of a system, combined arms warfare, where tanks, infantry, artillery, and aircraft worked together. In that role, it excelled. The Sherman's story did not end in 1945. Thousands remained in service around the world. In Korea, Shermans fought again, this time against Soviet-built T-34s. In the Middle East, they served with Israeli forces in the 1950s and 1960s, upgraded and modernized. Even decades after the war, the Sherman's adaptability kept it relevant. Its legacy was not just technical, but symbolic. To Allied veterans, the Sherman was the machine that carried them across Europe. To liberated nations, it was the tank that rolled into their towns, ending years of occupation. To historians, it remains a reminder that wars are not always won by the best weapon, but by the weapon that is there in time, in numbers, and in the hands of determined men. The story of the Sherman is not one of perfection. It is one of persistence. On paper, it was never the strongest tank of the war. Its armor was thin, its gun often inadequate, and its crews paid a terrible price in fire and steel. Yet history is not written by the perfect machine. It is written by the machine that arrives in time, in numbers, and in the hands of men who refuse to stop fighting. The Sherman was mocked as a paper tank. German commanders believed it would fold under the weight of their Panthers and Tigers. And in duels, it often did. But war is not a tournament of single combat. It is a struggle of systems, of logistics, production, and endurance. In that struggle, the Sherman was unmatched. It symbolized the power of industrial democracy. Factories in Detroit, Cleveland, and Chicago turned out tanks faster than German engineers could design them. Ships carried them across oceans. Mechanics repaired them in muddy fields. Crews climbed into them again and again, knowing the risks, but trusting in the momentum they represented. For the men inside, the Sherman was both coffin and companion. For the civilians who watched it roll into their towns, it was liberation. For the German soldiers who faced it, it was inevitability. The lesson endures. Wars are not won by the most advanced weapon, but by the weapon that can be built, supplied, and sustained. The Sherman was not the best tank of the Second World War, but it was the right tank for the war the Allies had to fight. And when the smoke cleared in 1945, it was the Sherman's tracks that stretched across Europe from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of Germany, marking the path of victory.